Folks, thanks for coming along tonight, where Bettina Arndt makes a welcome return to the Sydney Institute. Bettina Arndt is very well known, obviously. She studied at the ANU in Canberra and UNSW in Sydney. She became perhaps Australia's first sex therapist. She was the editor of Forum magazine for many years and spent a couple of decades writing for the Australian and then Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. And in more recent times she's been freelancing, and I asked her what she's currently now doing, and she describes herself as Australia's first online dating coach. So Coach Arndt is here tonight to talk on the topic of the sociology of online dating. Bettina Arndt, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald. I'm very croaky. I hope I can get through all this. Now, I'd just like to ask, how many of you are single, unattached? Ah, okay, interesting. Well, I'm very pleased that some married folk or attached folk are here to hear about this, what I think is a really exciting social phenomenon that we're all witnessing now with online dating. It's interesting to think back to the 1950s when most people were couples. Most people were living in coupled relationships, tended to get married early, and most managed to hang in for long marriages. And there were a whole lot of things happened, I think, in the 1960s that started to change all of that. Women's movement, I suppose, the pill, maybe the sexual revolution. But what all this did was led to a huge shift in the age of first marriage, the average age of first marriage. And most of us now spend the first decade of our adult lives single or going through various sorts of attachments, but delaying marriage until our late 20s, early 30s. And that means by the time you reach your 30s, there are still a hell of a lot of people who are unpartnered. The number of partnerless women in their 30s has almost doubled since 1986. Then you go on to the 40s, where you have a lot of people still unattached, still having not found a partner, and a lot of very optimistic folk signing up for the second marriage market, having come out of their divorced out of their first marriages. 40s, 50s, then we hit the baby boomers. The baby boom generation now is mixed, lots of singles, but some never married, many divorced, and some widowed. And so what we have is this incredible change from a world dominated by couples to a world where most people spend considerable periods of their lives single. Not necessarily desperate and dateless, but certainly unattached. And this is the world where a lot of people would like to meet someone else, like to form some new relationship. And we are really lucky because it's coincided with the technology offering us online dating. And I think it's been a remarkable means of bringing together these hordes of single people who are looking for new partners. One of the things that always strikes me, people talk to me about the difference for people between dating in the real world and online world. And I tend to react by saying that's a lot of rubbish, because for most people, it's either a choice between online dating or no dating, because they're always complaining to me that they just simply never meet single people in their normal lives. They have very few chance of coming across someone who might interest them. And that's why online dating really gives them an opportunity they simply didn't have before. The figures are absolutely staggering to me. Nearly 1,200, between 1,000 and 1,200 people join up every day to our biggest site, which is Fairfax-owned RSVP. There's no real way of verifying the figures, but both the big sites, which is RSVP and eHarmony, claim about 2 million members. RSVP has had 4 million people signed up since it launched 17 years ago. And there was Nielsen research last year which found most Australians, 51%, have either tried online dating or say they would be happy to do so if they were in a situation where they felt they needed it. So that's been an enormous shift. We all know people who've met online now. And so it's moved from something which was really suspect only 10 years ago to the acceptable way for most people to meet each other who are single. Looking back 10 years, online dating was dominated by men. And there's been an enormous shift. Now we find, well, even a few years ago, it was mainly people in their 30s and 40s. More recently, we've had more young people coming on board, and also the older generation, the baby boomer generation, coming online. The eHarmony says that they've now got more women than men. eHarmony, this big website, says it's got more women than men in every age group over 35. And that reflects the general population as well. If you look at the latest census stats, you find that's exactly the same as the statistics emerge there. More men than single women than men in all age groups over 35. Now, I'm not going to give you chapter and verse on all the statistics I've got here today. This is all going to be able to be accessed through when Anne publishes this paper. I just didn't want to bog this down with too many stats, but they are really interesting. So where are all the men? One of the things that I hear all the time from my clients is, what's happened to all the men? How do we have this imbalance in the numbers? And a lot of people say, oh, it has to be all those gay men. Sydney's full of gay men. But that's just illogical, of course, because there's no reason to think we don't have just as many gay women as we do gay men in Sydney. I mean, that never makes any sense to me, and in fact the numbers are tiny compared to the heterosexual population. No, the answer to the question of where the men gone is much more interesting than that, as far as I'm concerned, because it's really a matter of fit, of mismatch. There are lots of single males out there, but they are not the sort of men that are going to appeal to the women who are mainly complaining about this, and certainly complaining to me, which is, my clients are mainly professional women, well-educated women, and they're the ones who are really struggling to meet men to match them. So we have 1 in 3 women aged 30 to 34, and a quarter of all the late 30s women don't have a partner, according to this is the 2006 census stats. And it's a growing problem. The number of partnerless women in their 30s has almost doubled since 1986. And the challenge is greatest for the well-educated women who are looking for equally successful men. Of course, there are women who are happy to marry down, who are happy to look for a partner who doesn't have as much education as they do. But the vast majority of professional women are hoping to meet someone who's rather like them. And if you look at the statistics there are 68,000 unattached graduate men in their 30s compared to 88,000 single graduate women in the same age group. And what's fascinating about this is how the numbers, that disparity is increasing. Really fascinating changes as a result of course, more and more women doing well in school, which we all applaud, and more women going into university, finishing university and becoming graduates and becoming professional women. And this is always celebrated as a great thing, but I'm always interested in the fact that that's actually not going to necessarily be in the interest of these women who are looking for equally educated men. So overall in their 30s, there are about 370,000 single women and men. But if you look at those men, half of them only have high school education. 57% earn 42,000 or less, and 95,000 of them are unemployed. So those professional women I'm talking about who are trying to meet men who are their equals, I mean, many of them are, if you like, the cream of the crop. But the men who are most likely to be single are marginal men, are men who are not, are many unemployed, they're ill-educated, they're not going to be a good match for the women who are looking for the women I've been talking about who are looking for partners. So that mismatch to me is very much part of the explanation of why we hear so many complaints from women about not being able to find anyone suitable. But there's another really interesting idea floating around, and it tends to be written about on male bloggers' sites. There's a group of male bloggers, they call themselves the manosphere, and they're always being criticised. They're incredibly misogynist and pretty out there, but I think they're playing with some really interesting ideas. And they suggest that one of the problems, the reason we have this mismatch in terms of available men and women, is the mistake women made, and they argue it was women who led the shift in delaying the age of first marriage. And they say we made a huge mistake in deciding to delay settling down until we reached our late 20s. Here's one of them, his name is Dal Rock. Today's unmarried 20-something women have given men an ultimatum. I'll marry when I'm ready, take it or leave it. This is, of course, their right. But ultimatums are a risky thing because there's always the possibility that the other side will decide to leave it. In the next decade, we'll witness the end result of this game of marital chicken. So what they're arguing is that a lot of women meet good men when they're in their 20s, but they decide they're not ready. And so they let these good men slip through their hands. There was an American journalist called Kate Bollock, and she wrote in the Atlantic about the fact when she was in her 20s, she had this great relationship with a man who was intelligent and good-looking and loyal and kind. She said there was no really good reason to break off the relationship, but she was convinced something was missing. It wasn't quite right. That was 11 years ago. When she wrote this article, she was 39 and facing grim choices. We arrived at the end of the staircase, she wrote, finally ready to start our lives, only to discover a cavernous room at the tail end of a party, most of the men gone already, some never having shown up, and those who remained are leering by the cheese table, or are, the ones you wouldn't want to go out with. You see, the men she's looking for are the alpha males, are the men that everybody is interested in. And what the bloggers are saying is by failing to tie them down early, we leave them with too much choice. Because by the time they reach their 30s, they can choose to marry down. They can choose to marry younger women, those younger women who are interested in settling earlier. They can fish outside their pond. They don't need to choose. A lot of the men, and the successful professional men in their 30s, some of them will decide not to marry successful women. They'll choose to marry women who aren't nearly as well educated, and they'll choose to marry women who are younger than them. So almost 1 in 3 degree-educated 35-year-old men marry or live with a woman aged 30 or under. So that's the game of marital chicken that Dalrymple is writing about, and our statistics would certainly suggest that women are already emerging the losers from that game. So what we've got is men in a buyer's market. We've got a lot of men who are doing really well when it comes to online dating. If you look back on the pattern of online dating, I mentioned that originally it was mainly men who were joining up. When 10 years ago, it was 2 to 1 ratio in favour of men. And then since then, more and more women have not only come online, but are being more active when they go online. Originally, it was mainly the men who were approaching the women. Now, a lot of women are realising if they're going to be successful online, they also have to do the approaching. The older the men get, the more they are revelling in the numbers being stacked in their favour. If you look at in their 50s, so you have 68,000 more single women than men in Australia. 13% of those men have degrees and twice as many of the women. So the odds aren't good. And there are a lot of men who are just having a wonderful time. Men who never had a woman look at them when they were younger, who are suddenly finding themselves in demand. Like a kid in a candy shop, one of my male friends tells me. And I had a letter last year from a man who wrote to me to say he'd been on our eHarmony for 3 separate periods, and every time he received between 600 and 700 matches. He was, he ticked all the boxes, doing well, successful academic, blah, blah, blah. Now, just to talk a little bit about the various sites that are out there, there's a lot of choice. There are lots of sites opening up all the time. I think most of them aren't worth worrying about. You need a big pool to do well in this business. There's no point joining a site which says it's for people over 50 who has a couple of hundred people online. It's just not going to work. If you're young and gorgeous, or if you're an old, well, there's these much desired older successful men, you can do well on most of the sites. I mean, you don't have to go to a site where you have to pay money. So there are free sites like OkCupid and Plenty of Fish. And, I've met anyone in that situation. These desirable people can do well anywhere. They don't have to pay for it. And now, do you know about Tinder? Tinder is this phone app, iPhone app. Amazing. That is actually now capturing the whole of the youth market, if you like. My children and their friends all using Tinder. It's amazing. If you've never seen it, get someone to show you. It's really fascinating because you just see photos, essentially, of people. Photo and maybe a couple of a line or two, and you flick in one direction if you like the look of them, and you flick in the other if you don't. And if they're interested in you and you're interested in them, they'll connect you and you can actually start talking to each other. Now, that started off as a reputation for, just being about sex, hookups, but it's actually now being used very widely. Lots of young people using it really successfully to meet new friends, to meet new partners, and gradually more older people as well. Now, I want to say something about the introduction agencies. We've had some really good introduction agencies that did a good job 30 years ago when there was nothing much else to help people, single people who wanted to meet people. I think they're really in trouble now, and I think it's disgraceful they're charging the sort of prices they are. The best known one, who always threatens to sue me when I talk about it, is charging over $8,000 to introduce their little pool of men and women. And the other day they were advertising in the Australian looking for men. I mean, it's like a sperm bank with no sperm. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to think that they can, match their group when they've got such disparity in the numbers of males and females. Because why would a man spend $8,000 to join an organisation like that when he can go online and be swamped with women who are interested in him? I have a friend who went to one of these agencies, and the only man they managed to introduce her to was her ex-husband. So if you're interested in this area, steer. I mean, I have so many clients coming to me who've paid out a lot of money to these companies, and it's really embarrassing and humiliating, and they're really upset they've wasted all that money. I was talking to the Department of Fair Trading. They're getting complaints all the time about a lot of those expensive so-called exclusive services, and they just can't operate anymore because online dating is taking over the market. So I would argue that online dating is the major place we have to go to try to find new partners, and particularly women who are in the more competitive end of the market, they need to make sure they're going to a place where everything's going to work for them. And that to me means going to the biggest site. I almost exclusively work with RSVP because to me it's by far the best site. The alternative I mentioned was eHarmony. eHarmony is just crap as far as I'm concerned because it matches people on the basis of personality tests. And that, I mean, all the psych research shows that's a total nonsense to think you're going to be able to bring people together on the basis of sitting down for an hour and filling in person. And they don't allow you to do your own search. So most people I'm dealing with are going to want to choose, they have certain criteria about what they're looking for. They certainly want someone living locally. They don't want to be sent truck drivers from Perth if they're a professional woman in Sydney who happens to match their personality. I mean, it's all a total nonsense. RSVP has a lot of advantages because it enables people to do their own searching. I have people in very big jobs who who are too embarrassed to show themselves. You can hide yourself on RSVP, not show your photos. You can hide your whole profile. I mean, there's a lot of aspects of their service that really work well. But they absolutely need to get everything right, particularly these older women who are the main group I'm helping. They need to have really good profile, which is one of the things, how I got into this whole business, people coming to me and saying, will you help me write your profile? That's such a fascinating thing, trying to work out what it is about this person that you can use to sell them. I mean, what is special? What is special about them? So interesting trying to work that out. Because you can talk, I realised at the beginning, I used to talk to them for hours on the phone and I get nothing out of them. And I've now got this process of trying to extract little bits, little anecdotes, little stories, something to make them stand out and be interesting. And there's always something. Everybody, when you really dig deep, there's something about them that is unique and interesting. I had this phone call from this man who, he sounded so weird. I thought, oh God, no way this is going to turn into a client, But I chatted to him, and I have photographers in most cities helping me with this, take the photos of my clients. And so I sent him along. He came good, and he wanted to join up, and I sent him to my photographer, and she came back and said, oh, he's a really nice guy. And I've got this document which I used to get these little bits of information out of them. And he did all this for me. And it's an amazing story, because it turned out he was a stutterer. And so when he talked to me on the phone, he was, he's actually pretty good now. He said he's pretty fluent in normal life. But you can imagine talking to someone like me on the phone was, it brought out the worst in him. And fascinating story. He works as a mental health nurse and working with these people who are, in a way on the fringe of society, who really love him and think he's a great guy, helped him learn to become more comfortable and more fluent. And so we put all this in his profile and said, talked about King's speech and said at least King George didn't have to go online dating, and because I had to prepare people for the fact that he was going to sound odd on the phone when they first talked to him. And he's in Brisbane, he's doing really well, he's getting a lot of women interested. So, this is the point, you have to find out what it is that is special about them, how to describe them. With women in particular, I have to work really hard to get them to realise and adjust to their declining market value. And we all hate that. Many of us who were married 30 years ago, and we had lots of, knocking back men like flies. We had men all over us last time we dated. To understand that the fact that your market value has declined and that you are not going to attract the sort of men you used to is really tough. And women just hate that. And the trouble is, as we get older, our shopping lists, in fact, increase. We have more and more things that are absolutely essential in a partner. So I have to work really hard to get women to come down to earth. There's a woman I was helping actually up the Gold Coast, and she was all excited about finally making the step to go online dating. And she sent me this profile of this man she'd found in Melbourne, and he was just drop-dead gorgeous, professional man. I said, "You're kidding. No way he's going to be interested in you." He'll be just inundated with women in Melbourne who'll be after him. Why would he want to look at a woman in the Gold Coast? Anyway, I had to do a lot of talking, and I said to her, you have to think about what really matters to you. What's the most important thing? You're not going to get everything you want, the man, but what is the most important thing? And she said, finally she came to me and she said, banter. She liked a man who would engage her intellectually, who would have a bit of, a light-hearted chat and serious discussion. Anyway, so we wrote a funny profile all about this. She had it all ready. The week before she was about to go online, she went to a dinner party and met a man who could banter. And she said to me, I would never have looked at him. He wasn't particularly good looking. He wasn't the sort of man who would ever have attracted her before. But she realised what really mattered was what was between his ears. And that's what attracted her. And they're still, that was like 8 months ago, and they're still together. So that is part of the process of helping people understand what they're dealing with and being prepared to put their... I always say it's like a job search. If you needed a job, you'd be prepared to put your head down and go through a lot of horrible job interviews because it really mattered to you. Now, this is the same. If you really want to meet someone, you have to have lots of cups of coffee. You have to, you deal with a lot of rejection. But it can really work. Now, having said all that, I should point out, I know perfectly well there are many women in particular who aren't interested in finding a partner, who are perfectly happy on their own. Or maybe if they did have a new partner, that would be just, a bit of cream on what is already a very good cake. Sort of mixed metaphor, I don't know. Anyway, many women have good social networks, they have plenty of friends, they have a comfortable house, they're really happy on their own. And men always say to me, we're supposed to be in a buyer's market. How is it that these women are so picky? Well, it's because they aren't prepared to give up their good life to just be with any man. They have a very set idea of what they're looking for. And they don't want to be a nurse or a purse. They're not prepared to look after a man anymore. They want someone who really offers and contributes to their life in some way. But I think it's although there are men like that, I meet a lot more men who are desperately wanting to move in with another woman and are looking for a permanent relationship and who don't have a particularly comfortable house or the same network of friends. I think there's a real disparity there. Now, one of the things I hear from a lot of my clients, I started hearing this many years ago, was all the men are broke. that they constantly meet. These are professional women who often have their own homes, and a lot of the men they're meeting are renting, aren't very well off. And I was very interested in this, and I decided to have a look at the statistics here. And sure enough, amazing thing, we never hear this discussed, because we always hear about, you know, older women not having any super, and the fact that there are women who are struggling, and of course there are. But if you actually look at the statistics, older divorced women are on average more financially secure than older divorced men. And that came as a real surprise. So, and now I'll be showing you, if you want to read this paper, you can see all the statistics there. David DeVoe from the Institute of Family Studies did some work looking at men and women aged 57 to 74. He found half the females owned a house compared to 41% of the males. The average household income of the women was higher. The one area where men outstrip women, of course, is superannuation, and we all know about the problems for older women and superannuation. And of course, there are many older women doing it tough, just as there are men. But the fact that there are a lot of women out there, divorced women, who are better off than the men they're trying to meet, is an issue that's very rarely discussed. So I was able to pull together a lot of statistics showing that. Latest census stats actually show that there are 100,000 more single women than men who are between the ages of 50 and 70 who own a house. So there's a real gap there. And it causes all sorts of problems when it comes to the dating scene. Men constantly complaining about the fact that women, knowing perfectly well they're meeting women who are better off than they are, and yet the women still expect him to pay for the first cup of coffee. The whole battle over who pays is very interesting in terms of the attitudes we have towards financial security. I mean, financial security is a really big deal for older divorced women, because many of us have worked really hard to get a little nest egg, to get our own security, and we're nervous of getting involved with someone where we could lose half of it. So it's right up there, along with the other main things on the top of women's wish list. I mean, what else? Hair. What else? I was trying to think what else I had on my list. Height. Potency. Potency is not a big deal at all anymore, of course, because we're living in the age of Viagra. I was writing at the weekend about the wonderful news that that Viagra, the patent for Viagra has run out, and the price of Viagra has dropped by 90%, which I think is fantastic news. And when I was writing about this, I mentioned a woman who was one of my dating clients, who met this fantastic man, really happy, and then about a month later she writes to me and says, well, actually, he's having a few problems with erections. And I get this a lot. This shows what a complete service I offer. I even offer erection advice. But, I mean, it is an interesting thing, because you can imagine, if you have a capricious penis and you're out there meeting new women, I mean, if it's ever going to play up, it's in that situation, isn't it? And yet, the wonderful thing is that we have these new treatments available for those guys. Now, I've lost track a little bit here. But I just want to talk about why it is a lot of men are finding themselves in this situation of having less money than the women they're meeting. And it's all to do with late divorces. A late divorce is a killer for many men. I mean, I've met so many men who 10 years ago were sitting pretty. They were, big house and St Ives, 2 cars, you name it. Everything was looking good. And then she decided to leave. It's usually the woman who decides to leave, even in that, these marriages of 20, 30 years. Look at the figures, are amazing. Percentage of divorces involving men over 50 have more than doubled between 1985 and 2010. So this is a growing problem for these older guys. And it means that what usually happens in divorce is, particularly if you've had a woman who hasn't worked all her life, the man is she's much more likely to get 60 or 70% of the assets. She gets the house, he got the super, what happened to the super, in the financial crisis. And it's always assumed that the man who was on the higher income is going to be able to regain his financial security. And of course, in tough financial times as we're living in at the moment, these older men are the first to lose their jobs. So I've met so many professional men who are in trouble financially, who are renting and who are really struggling. to meet the sort of women that you know, that they have traditionally been associated with and they'd like to be partners for. There's a man online at the moment, he's been there for quite a few years, who has it all worked out. He actually worked for Citigroup, he, you know, went to Scots, he, you know, had his life was doing really nicely, and then it all fell apart for a variety of reasons, including divorce. And now he's on the pension, he's in his I think his early 70s. He's trying to find a woman to support him. He's going out there and he tells women that what he needs is, he's worked it out exactly, he needs about $11,000 a year in order to be a suitable partner for a professional woman who'd like to go to the theatre occasionally or, you know, go to the opera. So he's trying to find someone who might offer him this sort of deal, to subsidise him a little bit. I mean, it's a fascinating thing how we rankle at that, isn't it? He finds lots of women will, you know, be toying with the idea, they go and talk to their girlfriends, they come back and say, no way. I was talking to a man up at the Gold Coast who was, I mean, he's in a pretty dire financial situation, and he's the first to acknowledge that it wasn't just the fact that he had 2 divorces that led him into this situation. He was playing funny games with his tax and he was caught out. But he says, you know, he's supported 2 paupers and kept them in very comfortable style for many years, 2 wives who never worked, and maybe now it's his turn. Is it a reasonable thing to expect if he meets a woman who's got more than him that she could provide a roof over his head? It's the sort of issue that I don't think we've really thought through from a female perspective, and many women are very uncomfortable about that. So, finally, just to sum up, I mean, I think the whole online dating world is quite extraordinary and enormously exciting, and it is a big success story. It's bringing a lot of people together who would never otherwise have met. And they're meeting just the sort of people they would like to meet. Often, one of the things people tell me all the time is, oh, I met this person, and it turned out he was a friend of a friend, you know, 3 degrees of separation. So it's not as if you're not meeting axe murderers, you're not meeting people who are totally out of your normal social world. It's just enabling you to meet the sort of people you'd like to meet, but you never get a chance to. I've had lots of people who've found successful relationships, living with a new partner, 1 marriage. I was very excited about that. But even if that doesn't happen, there are a lot of people who just make new friends. I mean, it's a good thing to make new male friends, or if you're a male, to have lots of single female friends to go out with or to get dressed up and go out on a date is a really good thing when you've been stuck at home for many years. Or even a nice warm hand to hold in a movie theatre. How bad is that? Thank you.
Yeah, no, well. Many thanks to Bettina Arndt. Thanks to Cause Chambers Westgarth for the use of this facility today. So we come to question and discussion. I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest. It's not often that we have a speaker here who offers a full service. So, can I just lead off by saying, look, I'm a bit of an old-fashioned guy, I guess, and whatever happened before social media? I mean, what's wrong with going to the pub? I mean, why do you need...
Have you been to a pub recently?
Well, not since breakfast, no.
I mean, me... Trying to meet people when you're shouting over loud music, where you can't, you know, see each other, let alone talk to each other. I mean, it's just madness, the idea that that was a suitable way of getting connected. You go along to a party. I went to a party, a 60th birthday party recently, a whole room full of people. I thought, oh, there's probably some nice men in this room. You start chatting to a man, his wife pops up next to him. I mean, you know, the business, you can't, every time you meet someone, you can't immediately ask, are you single? It's really humiliating, the business of going through normal life, looking for other single people. And this, I mean, not all the people online are unattached. You know, the good sites like RSVP is desperately trying to weed out people, you know, the players and the married men and there's a few of them, and there are scammers, and it's a slice of normal life. Everybody is there. But most people there are single and looking for partners, and that's a huge step forward.
So there's a question over here, and then we go down here. Yeah.
I'm interested to know your views on where children come to the mix, particularly for those in the kind of probably to mid-30s to mid-40s have younger children, and where do you see that?
Just repeat for the podcast here. It's about children. Yeah.
About children and single mums or single dads and the whole business of dating when you're in that situation. And there's no question it makes it harder. I've got some really nice single mums at the moment I'm working with, and a single dad, and he's a really good, if you 30s women, he's a really good-looking man, he's a psychologist, he's really smart, and he's not doing well at all. And I think it's because he's got an 8-year-old son. And he's hoping to meet a woman who would like to have more children. And so he's tending to go for the single women. And I think it's a real problem. And I mean, it's better, I suppose, if you're happy to take on, to approach other, single parents. But if you're a woman with a child hoping to meet a man who hasn't got children, you're up against it. There are certainly men who balk about that. And I think rightly so. I think having been through the whole step parenting thing, step parenting is really hard. And if you can avoid it, I'm not surprised a lot of people are shying away from that. But on the other hand, there are plenty of single mums who do really well. So, and it's still your best bet. Lots of interesting things about that. I wrote recently about the whole issue of sexual abuse and the fact that one of the biggest risks to children from sexual abuse is mum's boyfriend. And I started getting interested in that when I heard from people online about the fact, men I know, who would be, get to know a woman barely, it'd be a brand new relationship, and she'd invite them for a sleepover, and there'd be children sleeping in the house, teenage kids, babies, you name it. It's just, to me, really crazy stuff that you. And the biggest risk to children in terms of sexual abuse is the strange men passing through the lives of single mothers. So all sorts of aspects of that are really interesting.
So we go over there and we come to Seth, yeah.
It's a similar question, but the next age group, the elderly, people in their 60s with adult children who may feel that someone else is going to impact on their inheritance.
Yeah. The question is about the older people in their 60s, older people, young, frisky people in their 60s, who might find that their children, their adult children, don't like the idea of them online dating, maybe because they're concerned about their inheritance. I find a lot of people, in fact, have been encouraged into online dating by their kids. So it works both ways. There are plenty of people who don't want to see their dad living on his own all his life. Or would love mum to have someone new. I think, yes, the inheritance thing is part of the story, but only part of it. I have this lovely man I wrote about recently who was 84 and met his 80-year-old partner online. He's a writer and he lives in Melbourne. She lives up at the Gold Coast. She approached him, and both of them went online because they decided that was the safest place to meet somebody. Because, of course, the point is you can do it really gradually. You can start off with emailing back and forth, then you can have phone calls. You don't have to leap into meeting someone you've met in the pub, so. Anyway, this 84-year-old, so adorable. They meet, they start emailing, they Skyped for 3 months, which I thought was fantastic, before they actually met. He then got on a plane, went up and met her at Gold Coast Airport. She took one look at him and said, "He is my destiny." And he said to me, "We are now an item."
Seth.
Could I ask you how popular it is dating online with international partners? For example, somebody goes for holidays to Thailand and looks for a partner for a month, or wants to bring somebody here to help with home duties?
Yeah. Look, there's a lot of people from overseas trying to meet people through the online dating sites. So some of the professional men I've worked with, the reason they hide themselves is they just get swamped with women from China or women from Russia who are contacting them hoping to get a visa, ultimately. And it is a major problem, the fact that and that's part of the whole scamming thing, people, trying to seduce some older man into thinking he's going to have a lovely young thing in his life, and then she asks for money. And I mean, how stupid. I mean, I just think people who end up being scammed online are the same people who would hand over a lot of money to someone collecting from charity at the front door. I mean, you'd have to be really dumb to do that. And, but yeah, so it is certainly part of the problem that there are people using it for other reasons. And there is a group of Australian men who rather fancy the idea of a less demanding woman, and that's why they choose they think Asian women are going to be less demanding. Good luck, I say, but never mind.
I was just wondering, with that category of the younger women not wanting to get married and then to the late 30s not being out of the market or whatever, would you see that as a connection to feminism, or what do you think of the state of the nation with feminism in 2014 for those women?
Well, I certainly think...
about feminism.
Sorry, the question was about feminism and about how much that was part of the story in the delaying of the marriage and all these women being stranded, if you like, in their 30s who would have liked to have found partners. No question feminism was part of the story. I mean, I wrote something about this a while ago and talked to lots of women about why they decided to delay, looking for someone until they were 30. And it was often mum saying to the girl, don't do what I did. You've got plenty of time. You can have your career established. You can educate yourself. No reason to rush into finding a partner and settling down early. So it was very much an older generation telling the new generation that they didn't need to do this. And, it's an interesting question whether it's been a mistake.
Question on that.
So this is just a follow-up question to the question about people with children on online dating. Do you think that there's a benefit there for someone with children, much like the man with the stutter, in that they can be upfront when they go online and say, I do have a child, rather than when you're out in the wild, if you will, and having to find that point of saying to someone, or with the stutter, I guess it's immediately apparent, but when you have children, finding that point to say to someone, well, I've actually got, an 8-year-old son.
Yeah. I mean, look, in theory, this whole issue of the fact that your question is about essentially about whether there's an advantage of being online because you can present the fact that you're a single mum, and that means you don't have to find some opportunity to bring it into the conversation when you're chatting to somebody. Yes, I mean, that is certainly what is good about online dating is, in theory, you specify who you are. I'm a single mum, I'm 40, I'm this, and what you're looking for. I'm wanting to meet a man who has children, doesn't have children, would like children, that sort of thing. The trouble is not everybody is totally honest. I mean, particularly the age thing has become a real problem, the number of people pretending to be a different age from what they are. Half the world is 59. Mostly, or 49. No one wants to admit to being 50 or 60. And so a lot of people stay 49 for an awfully long time.
There's a suggestion that height's a problem.
Yes.
Height too.
I've heard a lot of people, men, lie about their height online.
A lot of men lie about their height. A lot of women.
It's a concern for a tall woman, that's the one.
Absolutely. Men lie. Look, if they say, a lot of men say they're 5'10" and they're actually. But a lot of women lie about their weight. I mean, that's the other big one. And amazing. I mean, it's just such craziness as far as I'm concerned. I was talking to a man the other day who drove from Canberra to meet a woman who was 12 years older than she said she was. Well, I mean, just outrageous to not confess that before he, did that 300k trip. And if a lot of people are using photos that are were taken 10 years ago when you were 20 kilos lighter. It's just crazy. You turn up at the date and their face falls. I mean, that's not going to be the start of a relationship. And yet it's become so widespread, the fudgy age issue, that I don't know what they're going to do about that one. But most people, I think, still are honest about most things. And as you say, it's a real advantage because you can say, here is a man who would like to meet someone who has a child. And that's a big plus.
Yeah, here and then we go over there. Yeah.
Sorry, respectfully, do you truly think that the men actually read the women's profiles?
the question is whether the men actually read the women's profiles. Look, nothing matters as much as the photos. So and there are a lot of men who would, you know, I don't think, I think the profile helps, and if you have great photos and a really interesting profile, you'll do really well. There are a lot of people, I've been online dating on and off for many years, and I never, only recently just put my photo up. I decided to be really brave, but for years and years I dated without showing my face, and I had a really funny profile and I did really well. So you can get away with it. And
It's an element in the marketing campaign.
yeah, it's an element, but nothing. I mean, I have this constant struggle about the photos and trying to get really flattering photos. And if a woman is really overweight, do I show that or do I crop her from the chest up? Difficult.
The picture you painted for us here tonight, do you see comparable trends overseas?
The question is whether similar things are happening overseas when it comes to online dating. No, and no question. I mean, I think we actually come out pretty well. We follow the same sort of trend as America and UK and so on. But I think the RSVP in particular stacks up with all the other sites I've seen overseas and offers a really good service in terms of having a lot of people there here and customer service that actually responds to you, and they try not to rip people off too much. So on. But you know, the trend overseas is for more and more people. I mean, I didn't invent the idea of being an online dating coach. There are heaps of people offering backup services overseas, helping people with searches who haven't got time to do the searches, helping people. I mean, online dating is really time consuming, and it can take up a lot of your life, and some people want to outsource all those aspects of it.
One question you mentioned before, some concerns about financial security being put at risk by older women. In fact, what are the risks for both sexes at the moment with their current sort of state of flux in divorce arrangements? And you know, do you have to can you lose half of your property in a short commitment? Or
yeah, the question is about the risks for both sides of losing your financial security, your little nest egg if you get involved with someone. And look, and there's a lot of controversy around the question of prenups, of premarital, pre-relationship contracts, and whether they actually stand up. I've talked to a lot of lawyers about this. Most people think they do offer some protection, because a lot of people, men and women, getting involved in these late relationships are going to want to protect what they have, and protecting them for the sake, you know, for their children and so on. And the trouble is that some of the big law firms don't offer them anymore, because there were some court cases where the prenup fell apart and the legal firms were sued and lost. So that's a difficult area. And then you can just spend 2 or 3 nights together a week and still be up for a challenge to your, someone could try to get hold of some of your assets. So it is tricky. You'd probably best not to spend too many nights together, I think, is the real solution.
Yes. You mentioned photos. So in the age of the selfie, is there something you do suggest that people do or don't do with photographs?
The question is about photographs, and in the age of the selfie, what do I recommend regarding photos? I certainly don't recommend selfies. For those of you who don't know what that is, that's when you hold your iPhone or your equivalent at arm's length and take a photo of yourself, and you look like some sort of startled rabbit. I mean, there are lots of people using selfies online, and most of them are absolutely dreadful. I mean, this is the best investment. I mean, if you've got a friend with a camera who can take lots of shots of you. I mean, my older women, I say, you need 100 photos to get 3 or 4 great ones. Because you need to really work out what's your best angle, and you need to relax, and you need to have on a few different outfits, because you don't want to make it look like a photo shoot, and maybe a little tiny bit of cleavage. You know, to get it right means you've got to have someone who's willing to put the time in to get you looking at your best. And I mean, the whole photo thing is just totally hilarious, because for instance, you see lots and lots of photos of men. Here I am near the pyramid, here I am on my African safari, And I often wonder whether that's because men have even more trouble than women finding someone who'll take photos of them. You know, at least when you're travelling, the Japanese tourists can take a photo of you in front of the pyramids. The travel shots has become a real cliche, and I try to get all my clients to avoid all these new cliches and to not mention travel up front. A lot of men say to me they don't like women who constantly talk about travel because they think she's a princess, you know, swanning around the world when he's still up. You know. All these prejudices that are out there, but I'm constantly gathering information to work out what can you say and what can't you say.
Talking about princesses, got a text in. It says, "What's wrong with blokes like me?" And it's signed "Truck Driver from Perth."
Oh.
You mentioned the truck driver from Perth, but that's a bit offensive, isn't it? I mean,
Look,
even if you don't live in Perth.
No, lots of women would love a truck driver in Perth, particularly Perth women. But yeah, I mean, this is the question of whether how many of us are happy to be involved with a guy who's less educated than us. How many women, I mean, the age thing is fascinating there. How many women would be happy with a younger man? I mean, this whole cougar business. And lots of women, most women who go online get men 20 years younger that are approaching them, because there's a lot of young men who quite like to have sex with an older woman, and that, you can certainly get that. You can't necessarily get a good relationship with a younger man, but if you want to do a bit of bed hopping, they're certainly out there.
Bettina, what's your forecast as far as marriage is concerned? Do you think it'll last the next 100 years?
The question is about my forecast regarding marriage and whether it'll last the next 100 years. I think so. I think there's no sign of any major drop in recent years in the popularity of, well, there isn't. There's no drop in popularity of people living together or getting together. And what's happened is the actual drop in the number of people who want that piece of paper. And that's a really unfortunate thing in my view. I'm a great believer in the piece of paper, and the evidence is very clear that people who actually marry are 3 or 4 times more likely to have a lasting relationship than people who live together and have children. So that's a real problem, growing numbers of people having kids in relationships where they're not married. But I think there's a real social divide emerging there. The people who are most likely to get married now are well-educated people who still tend to get married and then have their children, and at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale, marriage is much less popular than it used to be. More and more people having children in casual relationships, and so what's happening as a result of that is the affluent people are providing more and more security for their children because they're delaying marriage and they're having children later when they're able to provide for them, and the people who need the security most are choosing not to get married and have kids in unstable relationships, and that's a disaster, and it's an issue that's never talked about.
We're getting close to the end, so there's a question here.
Yes, when you publish this stuff, because I'd like to send it to my granddaughter. They don't have any sense of urgency about life, like you leave school, get your driver's license, get your friend, get married, get your kids.
So could you be a coach for grandchildren as well?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to listen to an old fogey like me, unfortunately. Look, there are very big differences in the way we regard all these issues. And whenever I write about the importance of marriage, I get such abuse, and particularly on things like Twitter. I mean, because the younger generation doesn't like to believe that there are any differences in different types of families, and we all celebrate diversity. So it's very unpopular to suggest that something as old-fashioned as marriage could be important for children's welfare.
Bettina, you've referred a few times tonight to older women. At what age do we turn and become older?
The question is, I've been talking about older women. What age am I thinking about when I talk about older women? When do we become older? Well, in terms of the statistics and the shift in the ratios, we're talking 35, which is a bit grim. But no, I mean, I suppose when I'm thinking of older women, I'm talking mainly about women over 50. That's the main group I work with. But I have quite a few in their 30s and 40s as well, men and women. But it's just that, the 50s seems to be a point where it gets much harder for lots of women. And it's a much bigger step for many women to embark on this whole process, and they find it very daunting. But there's still, I'm totally blown away. I can never predict who's going to be really successful. And there have been people who I thought had no hope, who met men immediately and have sort of settled down with them, and others who I thought would do really well, and they don't. It's a lot of serendipity involved in this process. But it's also a question of attitude, and the women who are willing to persist and willing to put themselves through these endless cups of coffee and lots of, sitting up late at night. The best thing about online dating is you can do it 11 o'clock at night in your Ugg boots and pyjamas. And women who are willing to look every day to see who's new and willing to approach lots of men and willing to go through that process, often for a long time, most of them will do well. Most of them will meet nice men.
So we've got a final question here. Yeah.
So talking about Tinder, some of my friends are on that, and it's quite interesting talking about their strategies. So you hear the guys just looking like for as many girls as they come across, and the girls are much more selective. But the guys tend to win playing the numbers there. So is that something you see on RSVP and the other side?
Yeah, the question is about Tinder, where you see a lot of men playing the numbers game and flicking through lots of women and approaching everybody who's might possibly be interested in women being more selective. And that's certainly true right through online dating. I mean, that's one of the things I have to teach women not to do. Women tend to look and look and look and find, here he is, this is the one, and they'll send him a kiss, and they hear nothing and they're totally devastated. And I have to teach them to, the shotgun approach is much more sensible. Men will send out 50 kisses, and maybe a few of them come back, and that's good. And to teach women to think like that and to see it all as not so deadly serious and not to get so emotionally involved with the process until they meet someone who's interesting to them. And you may have cups of coffee with people who may or may not be really seem initially interesting to you. And that's what's so interesting about the whole process. You think of how you met people in the workplace, for instance, and there'd be a man over there and he didn't seem very exciting or interesting, but you gradually started to talk to him and you start to think, he's quite nice, really. So the yellow light turned to green. And online dating is the total opposite. You're confronted with everything up front, and to teach women to look for possibilities, to look for those yellow lights and approach a lot of people who might have something to offer them rather than looking for the one. But I have to do a lot of talking.
Many thanks, Bettina.
Thank you.
Well, this is the most unusual speech we've had at the Sydney Institute since Bettina Arndt was here last time, which was also unusual. So, but it's been important, it's been entertaining and significant, and I've learnt a lot. I don't know what I'm going to do with this knowledge. I had intended going to the pub tonight, but perhaps I should go home to the computer. Put on the Ugg boots.
You should go home to Anne, thank you very much.
Home to Anne. Nancy. Anyway, many thanks for a very entertaining address tonight, and it'll be an important paper when Anne publishes it in the Sydney paper shortly. So well done tonight. Thank you very much.